I want to tell you about a time that I quit worship leading. I quit worship leading for 10 months maybe, and I learned a lot of things in the process. If you've been around the Leading Worship Well community for a while, you might remember that one time that I quit leading worship. There was a 10-month period where I didn't lead worship at all. And honestly, it was a really nice break. And it gave, people take a sabbatical like every 7 years. And I wasn't in full-time ministry for 7 years, but I was right about at the 7-year mark of being like in either volunteer or full-time ministry. And so I think I just hit that 7-year mark and it was time to take a little break. I think that's what God was revealing to me. But over those 10 months or so, I feel like I had a lot of time to reflect, and I shared it in a post a while ago, but I wanted to share it here on YouTube as well because I think it's beneficial for a worship leader who was in the thick of it and then took a step out and looked at everything that I'd been doing for 7 or 8 years or how long it was, and realizing where I got it right and where I got it wrong. So I want to share with you what I learned when I quit leading worship. The first thing that I realized whenever I quit worship leading has to do with the ministry to my family and friends. Because I realized whenever I didn't have a church to minister to, like I wasn't in, I think we all have that calling on our lives to be a minister in the church and serve God and serve other people. But whenever I wasn't in like an active ministering role at my church, I realized that I had neglected ministry to my family and friends. I realized that I spent so much more time focused on the people of my church than I did to the other relationships in my life. And I'm sure you've heard it said before, like, what is the priority in ministry? What is the relational priority in ministry? It's God, and then it's your spouse, and then it's your family, and then it is your church, right? And I was one of the people who got that backwards. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I put the church before God, and then I probably put God next, and then my family after that, my family and friends after that. And mind you, I'm a single guy, so I can't even imagine like what that struggle is like for somebody who's married. But I think that was part of the problem for me, is that I thought that this is just for people who have families. Like that order of priorities is just for people who have a wife and kids. Surely it's not for a 20-something-year-old, however old I was back then. Like, this is for, like, the 40-year-old who's got a couple kids and a wife, right? But I think that this is true for everyone. I think we have all been called to serve our church, but also to create meaningful relationships outside of that direct church ministering relationship context. I think we're supposed to surround ourselves with friends and family and build into those relationships as well. Because what I learned is that if you fail to pour into the key relationships with your family and friends, then you'll miss out on one of the key pieces that God has given us to sustain us through our ministry. I think that God has surrounded us with family and friends who are giving us encouragement in our ministry, correcting us when we're wrong, and doing it in a way that is deeper than just the church family that we have. I'm sure you know the tensions of relationships in the church. Especially if you're on staff, like things get a little weird in the church, and having a friendship with somebody in the church. It shouldn't be that way, but it feels that way sometimes. And so who do we turn to then? Like whenever we need encouragement. I know that loneliness is a huge problem for pastors in the church because they feel like they don't have any friends because they spend all their time at the church, and the only friends that they have are at church, and you can't talk to your friends at church about things that are happening in the church because that's kind of awkward. You don't want to gossip about people in the church or tell them you've got stuff that you can't tell them because they can't know about it. You know what I'm talking about. And so we need friends outside of our immediate church family, people that we trust, that we can talk to. But not only is it for our benefit, but we are called to minister to our family. Like if you are a husband or a father, You're called to minister to your family before you're called to minister to the church. And if you, I feel like Carey Nieuwhof says that. I always quote Carey Nieuwhof. I did a video about all the things that I learned from him, but I feel like he says it, but it's like, if you lose at home, you lose at work. If you lose at home, you lose at church. And it's so much easier to win at church for us worship leaders when we pick out a new song that everybody likes and everybody comes up to us afterwards and is like, hey, that was a really cool song. Or, when the lights are left on at church and somebody texts you and it's like 9 o'clock at night and you're about to sit down with your family to watch a TV show or something, and somebody texts you and is like, the lights are on at church. And you're like, I'll go take care of it. And they're like, thank you so much. And it feels good for us because we feel like we're doing something noble. It's like, things aren't going to burn down if the lights are left on at church. It's going to be okay, right? It wasn't your fault that they were left on anyways. And so the one thing that I realized when I quit leading worship was that I had neglected the ministry to my friends and families. And so in this new season of ministry, I'm part-time at this church now, which I think affords me the opportunity for some things that I didn't have whenever I was in a full-time role, but I would hope it would still be true if I was in a full-time role, that I feel like I've made more time for my friends and my family and ministering to them. I hope that that's the case at least. The second thing I learned when I quit leading worship has to do with my one-on-one time with God. Have you ever experienced this phenomenon? You tell yourself, I'm going to spend some time with God. I'm in full-time ministry, but I'm going to spend some time with God. So you sit down, you open your Bible up, and you start reading. And the only thing you can think of is, man, that'd be good for a speaking transition in the next worship service. Man, if I have to preach in the future, this is going to be good. Turn to the next page. Man, so-and-so in my church really needs to hear that truth. I should share that with them on Sunday. And so that's one aspect of this one-on-one time with God, where for those first 7-8 years of leading worship, it was like I got in this habit where all of my one-on-one time with God was always others focused. And it sounds noble at first, like I'm always thinking of other people and how this is going to serve other people. But at the same time, we need to pour into ourselves at some point. Like, we are humans too. We need to be fed in our relationship with God. I am a leader in the church, but I'm just a normal person. You are just a leader you are a leader in the church. You are just a normal person as well. I think of all the celebrity pastors, and the same is true of them. The same is true for us. We're all on the same page. We're all just normal people. We all need to prioritize our one-on-one time with God. So that's the first aspect of it, is that I was spending all my time in my quote-unquote personal worship time thinking about how does this apply to the people of my church. But then the other side of that, what I think that kind of transitioned into, was that I just viewed my preparation time of getting ready to lead at church, I viewed that time as my personal time with God. And I was thinking, I've got to lead a Bible study on Wednesday night, and so I'm going to do some prep for that and make sure that things are ready to go. And so I'd spend, a half an hour to an hour preparing to lead a Bible study, and I'd be like, I don't need to read the Bible for myself today because I already did it. Same thing with personal worship time. It was like I ran through all my songs for this Sunday. I don't really need to spend personal worship time with God. I kind of did that over here. And I think I realized that those things aren't the same. Like, there is an aspect of worship to those things, but they aren't in the way, at least the way that I was doing them, they weren't in the way that filled me up, the way that I needed to be filled up so that I could pour into other people. And so since I've started this new season of ministry, I've tried to be really intentional about my one-on-one time with God, and not having it be, number one, I need to read this so that I can come up with something to say at church on Sunday. But number two, I try not to have it be, I ran through my songs for this Sunday. That was my personal worship time. Or I got ready for this other thing that I got ready to prepare to preach at my church. And so that fulfilled my personal Bible study time. I've found benefit in separating those things, and like now when I wake up first thing in the morning, I'm in my Bible reading it, not for any purpose at church, but just to feed myself. You know, I think of this image of like a chef feeding people who comes into his restaurant, and he's in the back working in the kitchen day after day after day, and he never stops to eat. He's just always giving food to other people. Eventually that chef is going to starve to death, right? And I think we do the same thing as pastors. We are in the kitchen cooking and cooking and cooking and handing out food to people, serving them over and over and over again, but we never take time to eat for ourselves and nourish ourselves so that we can continue to serve the people in our church. A starving chef can't feed their dinner guests forever. They'll eventually collapse from exhaustion. A starving pastor can't feed their church forever. They'll eventually collapse from exhaustion. Speaking of collapsing from exhaustion, segue. One of the other things that I learned when I quit worship leading was that I needed true deep rest. Something more than whatever I was calling a Sabbath. Because a Sabbath to me, I was very intentional about taking a Sabbath day every week. And it was like, every Friday I'm going to take off and I'm going to, be off. I don't think I ever even really defined what it meant, but I was off from church responsibilities. And maybe you've felt this, but maybe you haven't actually called it out for what it is yet. But have you been taking a Sabbath, committed to a Sabbath? If you haven't been committed to taking a day off every week, first of all, you need to do that. But maybe some of you have been taking a day off and you still feel exhausted. That was me. I was taking a day or two off every week, and for some reason I still felt exhausted. And it was because I never practiced true deep rest. It was like this surface level rest where I told myself that I was taking the day off and I might have worked on a few little things here and there, or something was always in my mind, but I never got true deep rest. I think of it like a phone battery. Whenever you have to go somewhere, like you're about to go out somewhere for the rest of the day and you look at your phone and you're like, oh no, it's at 10%. I better charge this before I go. And so you charge it up to like 50% before you have to go. And then you have to leave and then you're just on 50% the rest of the day. I felt like that's what my rest was. Like I only ever charged up to 50%. And I'm sure like with your phone, 50% your phone still works. But for us, like 50% we still work, but 50% sucks, right? 50% is not good. And actually 50% is probably worse than 0% because at 0%, at least we recognize that we need to recharge. But I think so many of us are living at a 50% full battery. I know that I was for so long, a 50% full battery. Never at 100%, never at 0% recognizing that I needed rest. So I want to ask you, what do you need to get to 100%? And here are just a few rules that I put around deep rest for myself. Number one, and I think I got this from somewhere, I can't remember where it's from though. Deep rest lasts for a minimum of 3 days, but probably is best experienced for a 7-day break. When is the last time you took a 3-day break? When's the last time you took a week off? I hope it was sometime in the past year. This is something that I'm going to be more intentional about next year, because especially since I'm part-time, I don't feel quite as overwhelmed as I did when I was full-time because I'm not at church all the time, but I still recognize that I need time off, and I haven't really taken the time off that I need. I've only taken 1 week off this year, and so next year, I can take 4 Sundays off a year, so I'll probably schedule at least 3 in advance and leave 1 Sunday if I'm sick or something. True deep rest lasts for a minimum of 3 days, more preferably 7 days, probably best experienced through a 7-day break. Number 2, and this is really important, true deep rest must be done in a way that all of your responsibilities are covered in a way where you don't even have to think about them. Think about how many times you've taken a break from church, but in the background, you're like, I know this is gonna go wrong on Sunday. What if this goes wrong? Oh no, I forgot to put the slides, that one song in the slides for this Sunday. And we have these thoughts in our head and we never actually turn our brain off. So do you have a plan in place where you don't have to think about it? Like you have people in your church who can cover your positions in a way where they don't need your help. It's kind of funny. I don't know if this was appropriate or not, but I really wanted to practice that when I took vacation this year. and I was talking to my sound guys who they know what they're doing. But so just last time I was on vacation, something went wrong and they called me while I was on vacation. And it was like something that I think I didn't pick up the phone, and then they figured it out anyways before I called back. And so this year, and I don't know if this was appropriate or not, let me know in the comments below. I said, hey, I'm gonna be away, in a couple weeks. I would love if you didn't call me. And I said, like last year when you called me and I didn't pick up right away, and then you figured the problem out because you had to, do that same thing again this year, but just don't call me in the middle of the process. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but I was just like, I would love to be like, calling me is not even an option this Sunday. Like, there's nothing that is going to go that wrong on a Sunday morning that can't be figured out, or figured out a different way that requires somebody to call me during my week off. So I don't know, maybe you need to use that line if you think that that's appropriate. I'm still not sure if it was or not, but I said it and I can't take it back. And then the last truth about deep rest is that you must do something that fills you up. It's not just about not doing anything. It's about doing something that fills you up, and only you get to define what that looks like for you. For me, it's probably going on a hike. It's probably maybe hanging out with some friends. It is reading a book and drinking a cup of coffee. What are the things for you that actually fill you up? Nobody else gets to tell you what it is. Everybody has their own things that fill them up. For me, I'm sort of an introvert, so I like a lot of time by myself, and that fills me up. I was talking to somebody in my church recently, and I told them that, and they were like, that sounds horrible to me to spend all that time alone, because I'm an extrovert and I'm filled up by other people. So maybe for you, it's like, I need to go and be part of some huge gathering and be around a bunch of people. Whatever it is for you, find out what fills you up and do it. The fourth thing I learned when I quit worship leading for 10 months was that I had been cheating my gift. I had not been focusing on musical development. And this is another thing from Carey Nieuwhof that he talked about, where he was talking about how in ministry we always cheat our gifts. There's so much to do in ministry that if we are really good at 3 things over here, but there's 10 things that need to be done, we will focus all of our time on those 7 other things that need to be done, and we neglect the 3 things that we're actually really good at, because we figure, you know what, I'm really good at these things, so I don't need to practice them. I can just wing it on Sunday. And that's what I was doing. I was really good at music, is the thing that I'm specifically thinking of. And so I didn't focus on the musical side of leading worship, and I focused on all the other things that I had to do in ministry because I wasn't good at them. So I spent all my time doing those, and I cheated my gift. I never developed my musical gift, and it wasn't until I quit worship leading and didn't have all of the other responsibilities that I could actually focus on the musical side of how God has gifted me. Like, I believe that God has gifted me musically, and I don't say that to sound prideful. I believe that it is a gift from Him, and we should not neglect the gifts that He has given us. So during that 10-month break, I learned more songs than I've ever learned. I learned more techniques on the guitar. I improved my singing. I wrote more songs than I've ever written. Basically, I grew in my musical ability in probably 2.5 months, more than I did in the past 2.5 years. So don't neglect your gifting, even if you are in ministry. I think I've come to the realization that it's better to pour into our strengths and lean into those and find other people who can complement our weaknesses in the church. That's kind of what we're supposed to do as the church, right? We are the body, and not everybody has the same job, but as leaders in the church, we try to do everything ourselves, and we don't rely on the other body parts. So figure out what you're good at. Lean into those strengths and find people who can supplement your weaknesses, who are probably actually good at those things that you're weak at, and then give those responsibilities to them and focus on the gifts that God has given you and develop those instead of neglecting them. The 5th thing that I learned when I quit leading worship has to do with being ministered to. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but I spent all my time ministering to other people that I never was ministered to myself. I was leading every gathering. And I talked about this in terms of my personal worship time and my personal Bible study time, everything was focused on other people. But now I'm talking about like receiving from other people as a church member. I spent all my time preparing to lead worship on Sunday morning. I was preaching on Sunday mornings. I was leading Bible studies. And I never found an avenue where I could come to the church and receive without any expectation of me giving. And I've learned that that's really important, because what happened whenever I quit leading worship? Well, I joined a small group Bible study where I got to show up and I didn't have any responsibilities. I literally showed up. If I wanted to, I could not say a word and the gathering would be just fine. And not only that, but I started attending a church where I didn't have to lead worship. Nobody even knew who I was, which isn't like the ultimate goal for a church. I'm just saying, like, nobody even knew that I led worship there. And so I showed up and I was just another church member. I wasn't the worship leader. I just got to show up and receive from the church gathering. And I think that as worship leaders, we can't live in that space all the time, but we do need to find a space where that can happen. Do you have a space in your church where you can be ministered to without expectation of you doing anything? And I'm talking about no expectation of you doing anything at all. Like, you don't have to come in and set the space up. You don't have to unlock the door for people to get into the church building. You literally show up to it as a normal church member, and you get to sit and just be in community. That's what I found whenever I joined the small group. I don't know if I found that spot, honestly, in the season that I'm in right now, because the small group Bible study that I was a part of disbanded. But I need to find another one of those environments, and you need to find an environment like that as well, where you can be poured into without having to pour yourself out or have any responsibilities. So I quit worship leading. That's what I learned. And those were like some high level things. If you want some practical things to work on in your worship leading, I've got a link down in the description below to 5 tips to instantly improve your worship leading. It's a free audio training I put together. These are 5 simple things that you can do this coming Sunday, before this Sunday, that will instantly level up your worship leading. So check that out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.